Well, hello there, and I do hope you're all well. Now, this is the final video of the weekend, my friends, and it's a wonderful treat for all my SNP supporting subscribers, who I'm incredibly humbled by for fantastic support for my channel, so thank you. Now, the reason why I've done this is because I found this opposite motion day truly fascinating from all sides, and so I decided for two reasons to upload the whole bit, and the only reason why is because I know it'll, for all my SNP supporting subscribers, it'll bring out, is it the Robbie Burns or the William Wallace out in you, and also just get you all warmed up for Max's live stream later on in the evening. So it's a bit of a long one, so from here I shall just bid you farewell and just have a wonderful weekend. And if I don't see you at Max's live stream, just take care. So have a wonderful weekend and see you Monday.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hear the honourable gentleman from a sedentary position saying too long. Well, of course, he's right. Yeah. It's been too long that Scotland's been stuck in this union. And I look forward to the opportunity for my colleagues to leave this House for the last time when Scotland becomes an independent country. Too long. Indeed, it's been too long. Mr. Speaker, I think it's fair to say that Westminster has been no stranger to chaos and crisis over the last number of years. But even with that in mind, it's still been hard to fully take in the mayhem and the madness that has gone on in this place in the last few weeks. Another Tory Prime Minister gone. Another Tory Prime Minister imposed on Scotland. The only thing that stays the same is the constant crisis of this place. Even the member for West Suffolk's kangaroo gentilia eating junket to Australia passes for normal affair round here these days. But the core of today's motion is designed to demonstrate that the permanent political pantomime that Westminster has become isn't somehow victimless or benign. It comes with a massive, massive cost. Each and every one of these Westminster crises comes with a consequence. And it's always those that can least afford it who end up paying the price of the failure of Westminster control. Let's, Mr. Speaker, take the example of the last few months. The UK government, the UK government has been so consumed by their own political crisis that they have been too busy ignoring the economic crisis that they caused with their mini-budget on the 23rd of September. Yep. Not just ignoring it, but completely blind to the mess that they made. In the last 10 days, it's been hard not to notice that the Tory benches are in a state of excited relief that they got rid of a Prime Minister who managed to crash the UK economy in the space of 44 days. And in their great relief, they seem to have magically forgotten that they were the ones that put her in place. They were the ones that were cheering on her libertarian joyride until the very moment that she crashed the economy. They may have gotten rid of the Prime Minister they put in place, but for ordinary people, the damage is already done. I'll give way.
Grateful to the honourable member for giving way, and I get extremely anxious about my homeland splitting away from my now home country, particularly as there's no credible fiscal plan in Scotland. As I see child poverty increase, the once leading education system trashed, and the NHS left to deteriorate, I wonder who is at fault. Does the right honourable member accept that whilst the Tory government has let Scotland down...
Order. It's meant to be an intervention, not a speech about all your issues. I'm more than happy to put you on the list. Come on in, Blackfoot.
Well, Mr. Speaker, if anybody is letting himself down, it's the honourable gentleman, because, of course, if you looked at the Scottish Parliament, we've done our best to the effects of Tory austerity. And by goodness, Mr. Speaker, we can applaud what the Scottish Government has done with the child payment. Introduced at £10, increased to £20 and now up at £25. But we cannot stop the damaging effect of austerity on our country, because the bulk of economic powers lie in Westminster. And the honourable gentleman and his colleagues in the Labour benches might indeed support the Scottish Parliament, our Parliament, that does its best to protect the people from what happens in this place here in Westminster. And of course, Mr Speaker, the damaging effects of Brexit that mean our businesses can't fulfil their potential. The honourable gentleman ought to look in the mirror. I will give way.
I'm very grateful, honourable gentleman. The reality of who's split away in values, it's been the red Tories and the blue Tories here. But he should know, and he should be aware of this, that Ireland, who became independent, sees the 5% of poorest people in Ireland are 63% richer than the 5% of poorest people in the UK. And if ever there was a lesson to be independent, that's it.
Well, indeed, my honourable friend is quite correct. And indeed, when we look around the world, what we see are small countries that are thriving. It is the case that small countries tend to do better than larger ones. There are no economies of scale for large countries, and it's Westminster, it's the UK that is holding Scotland back. Mr Speaker, let me return to the remarks I was making about the economic situation that we face today. The pound is still down against the dollar and the euro. Mortgage rates are at the highest rates since the financial crash. And inflation is still at a 40-year high. History shows that the Tory party always act fast to rid themselves of their own political problems, but they always fail to take responsibility for the crisis they create. They are failing to take responsibility for the cost of living crisis they created and the failing UK state that they presided over the last 12 years. Because, Mr Speaker, it would be wrong to believe that the deep damage done over the last few weeks are somewhat isolated incidents. It doesn't take a genius to know that the timeline for every bit of turmoil in this place over the last few years stems from one place and one place only: the disaster, the utter disaster of Brexit. And 6 years on, it's been a disaster by every significant measure.
Little England.
Brexit broke Britain. Only yesterday, Scotland's Herald's newspaper revealed that the value of Scotland's exports have witnessed a drop of over 13% in 2 years, costing £2.2 billion, with Brexit entirely to blame. That's what Brexit has done to the Scottish economy and Scottish trade. That's been the impact of what the Tories have brought to us. But faced with these Brexit facts, it's a disgrace that Westminster's only response is to say one of two things: suck it up or shut up. Well, I can assure those Brexit fanatics that we intend to do neither. Because, Mr Speaker, the reality of Brexit is biting everywhere. Last week I visited the Nevis Bakery in my own constituency. The owner, Archie Patterson, explained to me that they currently employ 30 people and they could easily double that tomorrow, expanding their production line, expanding their premise and growing the local economy. But there is one thing stopping them, just one thing stopping them, and it's Brexit. Brexit means they have no access to labour. The balance of workers used to be 80% EU-skilled bakers. That has declined to only 20%. And because they can't get the staff, they can't expand. And it's the same story for businesses across the Highlands and the same story for businesses right across Scotland. Denied economic opportunity, denied the opportunity to grow our economy, denied the opportunity to prosper and to deliver the taxation receipts, delivered by the Brexit that Scotland never voted for. I'll give one.
I'm very grateful to the honourable gentleman for giving way and agree with much of what he's saying about the incompetence of the Conservative government. But I do feel that on Brexit there's an important fact that's being missed here. During that referendum, when many of us were fighting very hard to make sure that the EU stayed within, that the UK stayed within the EU, the Scottish National Party spent just £91,000 on their campaign. 13% of what they could have spent. Indeed, they spent less on that campaign than they spent on the Shetland by-election. They spent less than 7% of what they spent in trying to take Scotland out of the UK. So will he take this opportunity to apologise to everyone who voted to Remain for the fact that the SNP went missing from the pitch during that campaign?
My goodness, Mr. Speaker, I mean, I hate to point out to the honourable gentleman that 62% of those that voted in Scotland voted to stay in the European Union, and I'm proud to say that myself and my honourable and right honourable colleagues on these benches were up and down Scotland during the Brexit campaign, leading the people of Scotland, making sure that we were making the case for Scotland to stay in Europe. I will.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. On that point, can the leader of the SNP please explain to us if that is the case? He spent less, his party spent less on the EU referendum than a by-election, a Scottish parliamentary by-election, on Shetland.
You know, this would be funny, Mr. Speaker, if it wasn't so tragic. It used to be the case. Yeah, you know, we've got many hours for debate, and I'm sure if Labour and Liberal Democrats calm down, they'll get the opportunity to speak. But maybe I should point out to the honourable lady that the Liberal Democrats used to proclaim staying in Europe. But just like... No, you don't. No, because if the Liberal Democrats, as she was suggesting, want to stay in Europe, they would have that in their manifesto. The Labour Party and the Liberal Democrats have run away from Europe, just as they've run away of their responsibilities to the people of Scotland.
I'm grateful to my right honourable friend for giving way. Isn't it the case, just to educate the honourable gentleman there, that we not only carried the argument in Scotland winning 62% of the vote for Remain, but carried that argument successfully in every single council area in Scotland, all 32 of them.
Well said, Mr. Henry.
My honourable friend is quite correct. Every local authority area in Scotland voted to Remain. But of course, it's not just the fact that people across Scotland voted to Remain. It is the fact that that desire, that demand to stay in Europe has increased over the course of the last few years. In fact, recent polling shows that as many as 72% of Scots wish to remain in Europe. And I would say to those that are watching back in our own country that there is a way we can achieve this. There's a very clear way we can achieve this. And that is that if Scotland has its right to determine its own future, if our Parliament, which has an independence majority, can enact that referendum that our people have voted for, then Scotland's journey to independence, Scotland's journey back into the European Union will be complete.
I'm very grateful to my right honourable friend for giving way.
Point of order, Mr. Speaker. I've just been called a liar by the honourable
Well, I didn't hear what was said. Just. Do you want to go out early for a cup of tea? Because you're on my speaking list. Let me deal with it. Mr. Bonner, I need no help. Thank you. If somebody said it, I expect them to withdraw it, because we do not use that in this chamber. Toby Perkins.
I certainly withdraw any implication the honourable gentleman was a liar. I didn't say he was a liar, but I did say that what he said was untrue. But I withdraw that in respect to yourself.
Come on, Ian Blackford. No, we're moving on. We've dealt with it. Ian Blackford.
I give way to my
I'm very grateful to my right honourable friend for giving way. Does he think that people at home will be looking on askance at the benches of the Labour Party? First of all, apologists for the Conservative chaos that they have inflicted on Scotland's economy, and now some kind of supporters of Brexit, which has caused so much harm to Scotland. It's really inexplicable how benches there on this side of the House can take such positions, and we all heard them, of course.
Well, I'm grateful to my honourable friend, and of course she's quite correct. Mr. Speaker, it's 1:10. We have till 7 o'clock tonight to debate this issue. And the promise that I make to those in other parties across this House that we will be respectful to the importance of this subject, because this is about Scotland's future. And I say to friends, colleagues across the House, Conservatives, Labour, Lib Dems, let's have that debate about Scotland's future. Let's respectfully disagree on what we see as the future. We will put the case for Scotland to be an independent country. Come with us, engage with us, put the case for the Union, put the case for Scotland to stay in the Union, because, friends, I have to say, when we have these debates, I don't hear what is the case for Scotland staying in the Union. Mr Speaker, the evidence of the damage being done by Brexit is mounting by the day. And yet, from those that forced this on Scotland, not one word of contrition, not one word of apology has ever been offered for the massive act of economic self-harm that has been inflicted on all of us. I'm tempted to say, when it comes to Brexit in Westminster, that there are really none so blind that will not see, and my goodness, has that been shown today. But the truth in many respects is even worse, and I will give him.
Full to the right honourable member for giving way, and I welcome the comments that he says that he wants a serious debate about the status of Scotland within the Union and the benefits of Scotland for being in the Union. But in all of the argument that he's made so far, he has claimed everything from the rising energy costs, from the global supply chain challenges, all on Brexit. Does he not recognise that we have been facing a tumultuous global situation that needs to be recognised? And at least if he acknowledged that, then we could at least start having a sensible debate.
I thank the honourable gentleman. I think he's generally trying to be helpful. So let me respond in kind. Look, we are suffering from enormous increase in energy costs. I applaud the fact that we've got the energy cap. But let's remember the harsh reality that for people right up and down these islands, the energy costs have doubled over the course of the last year. One second. People are going to face genuine hardship. But look, I can see him shaking his head. But the harsh reality, Mr Speaker, is that we have an energy market which is determined by the wholesale gas price. Yet for those of us in Scotland, 14% of our electricity consumption comes from gas. We actually produce 6 times as much gas as we consume. We've been impacted largely by the failures of the UK energy policy, and yes, of course, by global issues as well. But the fact that energy prices, energy costs are so high in energy-rich Scotland is an absolute disgrace.
I thank the right honourable member for giving way. And just to reference the previous intervention, of course the last few years have shown us how unpredictable the world can be and how many challenges we can face unexpectedly. But doesn't that just hammer home how important it is that Scotland, in particular, gets the governments it votes for?
Yes.
And given that Scotland hasn't voted Conservative since 1955, does he not agree with me that by far and away the best way that we can protect ourselves against the unpredictable is to be independent and in control of our own resources?
Honourable friend is quite correct. Not since 1955 has Scotland voted for Conservative governments, and yet we face Conservative government after Conservative government. And the difference with my honourable friend sitting on the Labour front bench, I would rather have an independent Labour government in Scotland than a Tory government in London that is demonstrating its contempt through its policies for the people of Scotland. And that is the reality. Unfortunately, he would rather have a Tory government in London rather than having an independent Scottish government that he may have influence over. I'll give way one more time.
Again, referencing the previous intervention, isn't it the case that, yes, there's high global oil and gas prices, but we only have to look at Norway, who's got a sovereign wealth fund of $1 trillion, the biggest sovereign fund in the world that can be used to support these citizens, whereas Westminster has squandered our oil and gas revenues all these years. And even then, there was a Macron report in the 70s, buried for 30 years, that showed the wealth that accumulated to Scotland had it been independent. And that was both Labour and Conservatives had that information for the Scottish population.
My honourable friend is correct, and I think the taxation receipts for North Sea oil over the period he's talking about have been north of £350 billion. What a missed opportunity. What a missed opportunity to make sure that we were able to invest for future generations, that we could eradicate the poverty that's been talked about, that we could deliver hope for future generations. And I will come on later on in my speech into the opportunities from green energy, because my message to my honourable friend, to those across this House, is there is a green industry revolution that could come for Scotland, that we need to create the jobs that will drive up productivity, drive up investment, give hope for people. But we're not going to do it while we're part of Westminster. Mr Speaker, there are plenty of intelligent people in this place, and I'm especially looking at the Labour benches here. But we can see the damage that Brexit has done. They see it. They see it. But they won't say it. And the reason that they won't say it is that they are frightened that they will lose votes in the north of England, and to hell with the consequences in Scotland and everywhere else. I'm sorry to say that this is one of the most shameful examples of politics replacing principle this place has ever witnessed. And that's really saying something for Westminster.
I'm very grateful to the honourable member for giving way. One of the reasons that the UK voted for Brexit was because the EU is ever closer union, which means the euro and joining up. Now, he's talked about independence. So will he be joining the euro, and therefore won't he be ceding some of his control over the fiscal situation that he wants to deal with by doing exactly that?
I'm grateful, but let me return to 2014. Because one of the things that we were told at the time of the Scottish referendum, that is, if we stayed in the United Kingdom, that two things would happen. One, we would stay in Europe, but secondly, that we were to lead the UK. That this was going to be a voluntary union of equals. But none of that has happened, because that very example have been taken out of the European Union against our will. But the key difference, Mr Deputy Speaker, is that Europe is a partnership of equals. And since he's asked the question about currency, I will take it head on. That when Scotland becomes independent, as it will, that we will retain the pound. And in the... Well, it's funny, isn't it? It's funny, because we're talking about people's future, and we're trying to deal with what is a serious matter. And the fact is, we will keep the pound until such time that a number of economic tests that are met that will allow us to have a Scottish pound. That's what will happen. I will give way one more time. Yeah.
I'm grateful for him being so clear and direct, saying he'll have the pound. However, if he joins into the EU, isn't the plan to join the euro and therefore have to concede that he'll have to do that? And by what mechanism will he therefore either keep the pound, the Scottish pound, or refute the having the euro?
I'd respectfully say to the honourable member that he should go away and read the treaties, because they're very clear. We are all aware as to what's contained within the treaty. But crucially, in order to join the euro, you need to join the exchange rate mechanism for a 2-year period. Joining the exchange rate mechanism is voluntary. You cannot be forced into the euro. Our position is very clear. Our position is that we will deliver a fiscal programme that will deliver jobs for Scotland, create the circumstances for investment, drive up living standards. That is what we want with independence. And we will make sure that we have the answer to the currency situation that delivers for our people on that point.
I'm very grateful for the honourable gentleman giving way. Perhaps the honourable gentleman opposite has been misled by headlines in the Times newspaper and should maybe appraise himself better of what's actually happening in Europe. On the 1st of July 2013, Croatia joined the European Union. Croatia is not in the euro. There are about 6 or 7 other countries in the European Union and not in the euro. You can join the euro if you want over your own timescale. It can be hundreds of years if you want. But you do what you want, what you think is sensible for your country. That's why you have independence.
Well, I'm very grateful to my friend for revealing the well, I'm afraid he's not wrong, because if you read the treaties, and I pointed out that joining the ERM is a step that has to be taken before anyone is able to join. I'm going to make some progress, and I will allow interventions later on. I will.
very grateful to the honourable gentleman for allowing me to intervene, because this is a crucial point that people need to understand. The current position of the Scottish National Party is to stick with the pound for an undefined period, to then set up their own currency, and as Nicola Sturgeon said herself when she launched the economic paper, she will not commit to joining the euro. So that does one of two things. It either denies EU membership on the one hand, or it means an independent Scotland would have a separate currency from both the EU and its bigger trading part of the rest of the UK. Is that not correct?
Well, the honourable gentleman is wrong, because I pointed out that in order to join the euro, I've already laid out that we will retain the pound sterling immediately on attaining independence, and when the time is right, when a number of economic tests are made, we will have the Scottish pound. There are 6 tests, and I'm not going to make some progress. I've already given away twice. I think I've been very gracious with my time, Mr. Deputy Speaker. As I said at the start, all the Westminster imposed chaos comes with real consequences, because the cost of the last 6 weeks and the consequence of the last 6 years of constant crisis mean that the Tories are right back to where they originally started, implementing austerity. This week, we have been deliberately bombarded by Treasury briefing about the difficult decisions that need to be made in order to fill the economic hole that the Tories dug themselves. But the return of austerity, if it ever went away, isn't a so-called difficult decision. It is instead what it has always been, a Tory political choice to hit the poorest hardest. No one should be fooled into thinking that there aren't other choices. In the week that BP announced a quarterly profit of £7.1 billion, why not take the easy decision to bring in a proper windfall tax to tax excess profits? Why not take the easy decision to end non-dom tax avoidance? Why not take the easy decision to reinstate the cap on bankers' bonuses? And with all that new revenue, why not take the easiest decision of all and protect those most at risk by uprating benefits and pensions in line with inflation? That, after all, was the promise that the Prime Minister made when he was Chancellor back in May. So, until each and every one of these easy and essential decisions are taken, the Tories shouldn't dare talk about difficult decisions that they are having to take. I fear, though, Mr Deputy Speaker, that the Tories and their new Prime Minister have already made their choice. They are gearing up to take a wrecking ball to public services and double down on austerity. That is exactly why we are now at such a critical juncture, because it's clearer by the day that austerity 2.0 is the future awaiting the Scottish people unless we escape Westminster control for good. That is why independence is not just desirable, it is now essential. But there is no better example of that necessity than the energy issue. This motion refers to the detailed and evidence-based report by David Skilling, who has laid out the facts on the sheer scale of the energy opportunity awaiting an independent Scotland, and I would encourage honourable members across this House to read that report. We have the potential to generate around 10% of Europe's wave power and possess 25% of the potential European offshore wind and tidal resource. And let's not forget that it's Westminster that is holding back our tidal potential with its refusal to fund it to the rate that will be necessary to generate up to 11.5 gigawatts of tidal energy by 2050. I will give way on that point.
I'm not sure if I think the right honourable gentleman for giving way. I'm not sure if I picked him up right, but he's accusing the UK government of not funding tidal energy when, in fact, 20 million of CFDs were committed as ring-fenced specifically for tidal stream energy.
I'm really delighted that the honourable gentleman raises that, because it takes us back to the discussions that we had last year. Because on the back of a Royal Society report that was published just before COP26, a peer-reviewed report, it indicated that potential to get to 11.5 gigawatts of electricity from tidal. Now, incidentally, Mr Deputy Speaker, that would be 15% of the UK's electricity production. It is actually the amount that nuclear contributes today. And by 2030, tidal would be cheaper than nuclear. Mr Deputy Speaker, we don't need nuclear to provide our baseload electricity, because tidal does it. And the fact remains, Mr Speaker, that 20 million welcome as it is, doesn't go far enough in order that this industry develops its potential. And when we look at the programmes that are already alive around these shores, about 70% of the value added from tidal comes from Scotland, about 80% comes from the UK. It is a domestically grown industry. We heard earlier about the contrast with Norway from my honourable friend in the oil industry. But one of the key lessons from that is not just to make sure that we've got the energy production, but we control the supply chain. And this is exactly an industry where we do control the supply chain. And I say to the honourable gentleman, and join me in pressing the Treasury to make sure we get that £50 million a year ring-fence pot, because that's what would allow us to fulfil our potential. And at the same time, to make sure that we get carbon capture and storage for Peterhead. Because these two examples, these two clear examples, are direct demonstrations as to how Scotland's been held back. Held back on its ability to deliver green energy. Held back on its desire to get to net zero in 2045. That, Mr Deputy Speaker, is the cost of Westminster control for Scotland.
Mr Deputy Speaker, I thank the honourable gentleman for giving way. I may be corrected, but I fancy I'm the only person in this place who actually did work in an oil fabrication yard at Nig. And at the time when I worked there were 5,000 people employed, vital jobs in the Highlands. We have the skills still, but the ageing skills, the skills are going. If we miss the opportunity to build offshore floating wind structures in Scotland, then we will be failing the Scottish people. What's the difference between us and Norway? Norway do build, we don't, and we should do something about it.
They're independent. I thank my honourable friend for that remark, and he's quite right to talk about what happened in Nig way back in the day, but it wasn't just in Nig, as he'll recall. It also happened in the west of the Highlands, in Kishorn, in my own constituency, in Ardashir. And if the Deputy Speaker would allow, we could sing the song the Kishorn Commandos, but we'll maybe save that for another day. Well, I'm sure. And there's many a tale to be told about what happened in Kishorn but this is a serious point. That opportunity to industrialise the Highlands, that opportunity to create jobs for generations, to create wealth, to create prosperity. And I congratulate him, because we've worked together on making sure that we're pushing for the opportunities in Cromarty. But, Mr Deputy Speaker, these are decisions that we should be taking in Scotland to make sure that we deliver on that promise. We can't say often enough the potential that we have in green energy. Scotland is energy rich. We simply shouldn't be facing an emergency. We shouldn't have cold homes and soaring bills, even before this crisis. And as my honourable friend from Caithness and Sutherland would acknowledge, we already have the situation before this crisis that 40% of pensioners in the Highlands live in fuel poverty.
On that point,
what a disgrace that we allow that to happen.
I'm grateful to my right honourable friend. He's making a very powerful speech. Does he agree with me, and do his constituents share my concerns, that when they look at these wind installations like Seagreen off the Angus coast, 2 revolutions of which can power a home for an entire year, yet they look out at them while they can't pay their electricity bill at the same time, thanks to the UK's energy market? Is that not in itself a reason to decouple ourselves from this broken union?
Indeed, because I think it's fair to say that we're being ripped off. We're being ripped off in transmission charges. And I'm grateful to the honourable member for Aberdeen South. I don't know if he's here. He is here because he took me off to see an offshore wind farm in Kincardine just a few weeks ago. But what a demonstration of the opportunity that we have from the North Sea. But that fundamental point that we shouldn't have cold homes and soaring bills. We produce 6 times more gas than we consume, and nearly 100% of the equivalent of our electricity consumption already comes from renewables. I've said equivalent on many occasions, but I thank the honourable gentleman for that. Well, you can look. I did have I ask for respect and honesty in this debate, but I think if the honourable gentleman checks Hansard, he'll find that I've said that on a number of occasions. This is Scotland's energy, and it should serve Scotland's people. The Skilling report shows that Scotland has the potential to boost our output by more than 5 times. More than 5 times. Increasing from 12 gigawatts of installed renewable capacity to over 80 gigawatts by 2050. And just think about that. 80 gigawatts of electricity by 2050. It's as much as 4 times as much energy as Scotland needs. It will provide the cheap green energy that will allow us to have a new industrial revolution, to see jobs come to the Eastern Highlands, the Western Highlands, the Lowlands and south of Scotland as a consequence of that economic opportunity that will be created. But by expanding Scotland's renewable capacity and by becoming a green hydrogen exporter, we have the chance to pump as much as £34 billion into Scotland's economy every single year. An investment, Mr Deputy Speaker, that would sustain up to 385,000 jobs, dwarfing the jobs today that we have in oil and gas. That, Mr Deputy Speaker, is a real energy transition. This is a plan for growth, green, sustainable growth for the long term, not the fantasy growth that we had from the Truss government and the absence of any plan from the existing government. Driving better productivity, driving an industrial green society and driving our economy into the future. It is a plan which an independent Scotland can and will be built upon. Apparently, the only UK government response to this energy plan is the bizarre argument that we should ignore the vast renewable energy potential and instead turn to nuclear. Well, let's be very clear. We don't need nuclear in Scotland. We don't want nuclear power. We will not be having nuclear power. What we want is the powers of independence so that Scotland's energy can finally serve the needs of Scottish people. And, Mr Deputy Speaker, in the latest Scottish Government paper on independence, our First Minister has set out all the economic opportunities that independence will unleash. Instead of Westminster anti-trade union laws, we could ensure fairer work with European-style labour market policies. Instead of an economic race to the bottom, we could build an economy based on human well-being, lifting people up so that they can contribute fully, not waiting for wealth to trickle down when the inequality gap grows. Instead of Brexit, we would be an EU member state in our own right. We would, for the first time, be in a position not just to benefit from EU trade deals, but to help shape them. Instead of a hostile environment and the disgrace of a Home Secretary that talks about invasions, we would have a humane immigration policy tailored to our needs. Now, I will happily give way to the honourable gentleman if he will join me and ask the Home Secretary to apologise for that outrageous language that she used in this chamber on Monday of this week.
I do genuinely thank the right honourable gentleman for allowing me to intervene on the point he was making on an independent Scotland being in the EU, which he'd made previously. But does he agree with his leader in the Holyrood, the First Minister, Nicola Sturgeon, when she says she admitted that there could be hard borders, passport control between Scotland and the rest of the United Kingdom?
Here we go, here we go, here we go, here we go. Project Fear all over again.
And no apology.
Let me give the honourable gentleman in this House the example of Ireland. Way back in the 1940s, close to 90% of Ireland's exports were to the rest of the United Kingdom. Today, it's less than 10%. But the value of Irish exports to the UK actually increased every single year, irrespective of the economic cycle. But the point is that an independent Ireland was able to pursue policies that delivered growth, that resulted in investment, that resulted in trade opportunities. That's the opportunity that independent Scotland...
The honourable member for giving way. I wouldn't want us to move too far beyond this point about humane treatment, however, because is it not the case that Ukrainian refugees in Scotland currently have to be housed in temporary accommodation on ships in which the space they must occupy is less than is legally required for prisoners in Scottish prisons.
I shouldn't be surprised by some of the things that we get from the Tories in this House. But has he got any sense of listening to what has been happening this week in Kent? And he comes and accuses the Scottish Government when it comes to those seeking refuge in our soil. Can I remind the honourable gentleman that we can be proud of what the Scottish Government has delivered, led by our ex-colleague Neil Gray, that we have around 20% of Ukrainian migrants that have come to Scotland living in our country. We have opened our doors and welcomed to them. By goodness, that's something that we should be proud of. I'm going to make some progress because I'm conscious of the time. Instead of Westminster control, we would always have the stability of knowing that the governments that shape our economy have been elected by us. That's a simple democratic principle. But, Mr Deputy Speaker, the great American writer Maya Angelou once said that when people show who they are, believe them the first time. Well, people in Scotland have shown more than enough, have had more than enough of Westminster control. We know who the Tories are. We know what this place is, and we know the deep damage it has done. We believed them the first time. And that's why Scotland hasn't voted for the Tories since 1955. Westminster has made its choice. It has chosen its future. It is a present and a future of constant crisis, a Brexit backing, failing UK state. It's time that Scotland left their choices and left that future behind us for good. We don't have to believe in Westminster control anymore. We only have to believe in ourselves. It is now time for Scotland to build our own future, an independent future in Europe. Mr Deputy Speaker, I move the motion in my colleague's name.